Africa's major mobile operators are fighting ICASA's plans to take away the temporary spectrum that it allocated in 2020 during the hard lockdown. This spectrum was allocated to augment the increase in data traffic caused by more people working from home because of the COVID-19 pandemic lockdowns. ICASA plans to auction spectrum in March 2022. Now, there are concerns that taking back a spectrum will have negative effects on the economy. How does all this affect the small companies and the consumer? Here to talk to me about this, I'm joined by worldwide Worx data analyst Bryan Turner. Bryan, good to have you with us tonight here on In Focus. Coming into work, I was listening to the radio and I heard an advert to say pretty soon those who are on the analog system of the television will no longer be able to get their favorite programming, so they'll need to shift to digital programming. What's the benefit of that, and why are we having this particular move into digital for our broadcasting?
Good evening, and thank you for having me on the show. The biggest benefit of this is that digital spectrum takes up far fewer bands than analog spectrum. So if you think about it as a rugby field, for example, analog spectrum would take up the entire width of the rugby field for 4 channels. But if we're to repurpose it for digital, it would only take up about a meter. The rest of it could be used for services like mobile networks and providing data to mobile phones.
Yeah, that's precisely it. Someone in rural South Africa would say, well, this really is not for me. It's for the big companies who are selling data, and they will get to see that real benefit. How is that going to affect my bottom line? Is my cell phone data going to be cheaper? Am I going to be paying less for calls because we've now migrated to digital?
Well, the main benefit for those who are watching currently analog TV is that the digital broadcasts will be very, very clear. Those who watch analog broadcasts often have to tune their television and fine-tune it. Now it will be, as they receive it, will be as clear as if they were watching a YouTube video, for example. So that is the main benefit. And then the other side of it is that because mobile networks have more spectrum, they can deploy fewer towers, and that hopefully will drive down the cost for the consumer in terms of data pricing.
Now, when the elephants fight, they say usually it's the grass that suffers. We're seeing big network companies fighting this out and battling with government, who is now saying, well, we borrowed you this spectrum, now we're going to take it back and actually auction it to the highest bidder. Is this a money thing for government, wanting to generate as much as they possibly can, and therefore is it such a bad thing? And what is then in the argument that the network companies and even maybe business is raising around this issue of spectrum?
So for the first question on raising money for the government, it's always legitimate to make sure that the government has enough resources in terms of, especially monetary resources, to continue operating. But in terms of the spectrum that's already been allocated, the mobile operators are saying that they've already put investment into putting up radios that use this spectrum. So now their investment is going to go to waste if that spectrum is auctioned to someone else. So that is the biggest upshot of this, is that the mobile networks want to remain broadcasting and utilizing the emergency spectrum, but at the end of the day, it's probably just going to go to one operator.
And going to one operator, that in a sense would stifle competition?
Well, in terms of auctions, spectrum auctions do tend to stifle competition. They're meant to create competition, but at the end of the day, it's whoever's got the biggest access to loan facilities who wins. And that will definitely be the big 3 or 4 mobile networks. It will never be a small player that is just starting out.
Yeah. And what then does government stand to lose by keeping, I suppose, the status quo as it is? Those who now have access continue to have access because they've built radios and so on and so forth.
It sets a precedent to show that they can give it away for free. And in other countries, that is what happens. Other countries, government gives an exclusive license and it says to all of the players, you have to create competition on pricing. and you don't have to pay for utilizing a spectrum. And that is how many countries do it. How ICASA wants to do it now is that they want to have something called a WOAN, a wireless open access network, which is a kind of a pool of spectrum that several smaller players will be able to enter the market on and utilize. But unfortunately, this has been attempted in Mexico and it failed miserably.
Now, we are currently on, was it G4, G5 technology? Is that where we are? And could we be further? And what does being further than where we are right now mean?
So currently 5G is rolling out, and 5G does rely on that, for certain networks, does rely on that emergency spectrum. And the biggest problem with it going back to the wrong players is that people who have signed on for 5G contracts, for 24-month contracts, will experience a pretty much immediate deterioration in quality of service, and they'll have to go back to 4G. And that is a huge step back for businesses who have purchased 5G, because 5G has the ability to run several computers. We're talking upwards of 100 computers at once on a single connection. 4G is just not capable of that. So for some businesses, it'll become impossible to sustain being on a wireless network.
So we've got all this upgrade in technology available, but we won't be able to use it because we are still on the lower network.
That is correct. And currently we're seeing that right now. It's still early days for 5G, and we are rolling it out as fast as possible in terms of looking at other countries that are doing it. But we will remain behind if the spectrum issue isn't sorted as soon as possible.
Yeah. Now, when these debates are being had, or at least when a government tries to make their case for moving to digital, they say if we get to the 5G network, this will be a key enabler for the fourth industrial revolution. Of course, that's a term that is used loosely, and what it doesn't actually mean to say this will be an enabler for a fourth industrial revolution. What's at the core of that particular assertion?
So in South Africa, we are positioned to become Africa's information economy. In other words, it means that we will be able to move vast amounts of information and data around on behalf of the rest of the continent. So whereas the rest of the continent will be doing traditional jobs that we know, we'll be moving into the fourth industrial revolution jobs of the future. But that relies on connectivity. We need to have fast connectivity to make sure that we can move this information around and move data freely.
So move connection around, move data freely, and move it with speed. Is that what we have experienced during this lockdown? I mean, with the additional spectrum being made available, were things faster and things were moving freely and much quicker?
To a certain extent, it didn't only rely on the temporary spectrum being allocated. Networks did have to make a huge capital expense on putting up more towers, because the demand for data just exceeded that of which the emergency spectrum could provide.
All right. And where does then the artificial intelligence technology come in here, and how does that help us?
So for artificial intelligence, especially with network towers, artificial intelligence, especially on a phone, if more phones can be doing processing on their device, then they would be able to talk less to a network provider cell tower. So the idea is we get our software to the point where we're transmitting as little as possible, as fast as possible, so that the job can get done as soon as possible.
Sure. All sounds very technical and of course a little bit above my understanding to an extent. And then this of course enables cloud computing as well, which in a sense they say this is good for maybe even education, for schools, storage of data and so on and so forth. What is the benefit for us?
So for big businesses that have come to South Africa, so we've seen Microsoft move their data center here, which is their cloud data center. We've also seen Amazon do the same thing, and Google also did the same thing. So we've got major players on the continent, and most of them are in South Africa. and that will increase opportunities like distributed classrooms. So classrooms of massive sizes that can be sent to all over the country. So a teacher in Johannesburg can be teaching students in Durban, in East London, in Cape Town, all at the same time. And we're talking maybe even hundreds of thousands of students at once, and not even necessarily from the same country. It could be South African teachers could be teaching students up in North Africa, for example. So that is the kind of possibility we're talking about here, is democratizing education through cloud computing.
Bryan Turner, appreciate your time, and thank you very much for joining us. Bryan Turner is with the Worldwide Worx. He's a data analyst there. Hopefully that has cleared some of the questions you could have possibly be having around this issue of digital migration and how this will benefit you.